Sabbath worship time. A lot of people running around. In the background, sometimes not in the background. Scrambling around trying to make sure something happens, trying to make sure that the service goes as planned, that our worship time gets sent out onto YouTube, that the sounds sound right up here, that the lights are on, that the greeters are here, that back there at potluck the food gets cooked. There are a lot of people who do different things like that. My wife is one of them. And one Sabbath morning, we had a guest speaker here. It's many years ago now, so I can say it. Otherwise I'd, embarrass someone. But he did his piece up here, and he went back and was getting ready to visit with everyone in the fellowship hall for potluck. And he talked to my wife for a second, who was cooking in there, and he asked what she thought of his sermon. She says, "I didn't hear it." And he went, "Oh, were you?" She said, "Oh, I was busy doing this, working in the kitchen." He went, "Oh, you're a Martha." That was a bit of an assumption. And it kind of struck her as odd, and it struck me as odd, because we don't think of ourselves that way. She doesn't think of herself as a Martha missing out on a service or getting so stuck that she doesn't get a blessing. We actually think of ourselves, myself included, as a different brand of people, a Levite. In the Bible, we have a whole bunch of discussion about what a Levite is. And, after that discussion, that incident, things moved in my head a little bit, and I had to kind of go, okay, so if that was where my brain went, maybe I should research a little bit and see why I'm thinking that we feel more this way, more like a Levite. So I had to look up Levite in a concordance. How many of you know what that is? Okay, look it up. It tells you one word, and it tells you where and how, where it's found in the Bible, every incident of it, okay? And that's a good place to start doing a study if you are trying to do it yourself. Now, I am not the studious type. That might surprise one or two of you. I'm more the upfront, sing and praise and do that stuff. And, I'm married into a family. You might remember Larry. He comes up and does beautifully well-studied sermons. That's because he would sit and have 23 books around him, all open, and research that way. And my wife learned that too from him and studies that way. Her mother also studies deeply into things in the Bible. So I had to have a little bit of that rub off. So I went back to the Levites, and in order to really get a good start of this, I had to go back to Levi himself. Levi was one of the sons of Jacob, right? So he had a really good reputation, right? That's why they have these Levites, right? No. Levi's legacy was not a very good legacy. The one incident that he's remembered for the most is when his sister got taken and violated. And then in the middle of trying to rectify the situation, and his father had gotten these people to try and convert and come to be with them, Levi, and I believe, was it Simeon? Levi and Simeon decided to take matters into their own hands, and things got bloody. He destroyed them while they were trying to rectify the situation. His father ended up, when he was dying, you're supposed to give a blessing to each of the sons so that they can be, God can bless them on. He was given a curse. So this is not a good start for the people who are supposed to be God's chosen workers, right? So this did not bode well for my, idea of saying I'm a Levite. So I had to go a little bit further into the story. And there's another redeeming factor, And oddly enough, it's also bloody. What is it with these Levites? They are doing stuff here. The golden calf. Moses went up, got the 10 Commandments. He's coming down. Aaron messed up, made the golden calf, and everybody around is worshiping the golden calf like they were doing in Egypt. And then Moses came down, broke the tablets, and said, wait. Somebody here has got to be for God. And this is where I connected, finally, what was going on here with the story before. Because see, what Levi really had was a sense of justice. Only it was a sense of justice in that he wanted to do it himself. And so when his sister got violated, he was the avenging angel when he shouldn't have been. But here, his family said, I am for God, and these guys are wrong. And Moses said, get your swords. Friend, family, brother, sister, father, if they're worshiping this thing, get rid of them. 3,000 people died because these guys said, no, we're not going to stand for this. They set up a line and did that. And in that story, God says, this is the point where I'm setting aside the Levites. You guys are now mine. You chose me over your family. And that is what led them to become the workers for God. The priests and Levites, Moses and Aaron, were from the family of Levi, all together. And Numbers 3:10 is where it says, the Levites are mine, in place of all of the firstborn of Israel. They would have to redeem the firstborn. They would have to, anything that was firstborn, they would have to either give to God or they would have to pay for it to get back. And some of it became offerings, the cattle and the sheep and stuff like that. But instead of taking the firstborn of your family and making him be a priest or making another firstborn come into this, he said, nope, all of you are now fine. The Levites are now, the firstborn of this part. Moses, of course, was the leader. And Aaron and his sons, that one family, was given the priesthood. They were set apart even more from the other Levites. And this is where it started with the family. Aaron was the one who was doing the sacrificing, ministering. He was blessing them. They were consecrated to God in a very strong way. And they had to change their clothes. They had to have all different types of priestly robes that set them apart from everything else. They all had particular meanings. They all had particular purpose in the worship service. The rest of the family was not forgotten. The 3 other families that were part of Levi's family at the time, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, were given different parts of taking care of the temple. Gershon was doing the curtains and the tent. So whenever the tent needed to be set up or torn down, that was their job, all through the wilderness. Kohath took care of all the furnishings inside the sanctuary. His situation was a little interesting because they were not allowed to touch or see those things. They were just taking care of it and transporting it. So they put them in boxes and put the altar in, covered the altar in a certain way. They were not even to touch the altar. They had poles, and they used the poles to carry the altar, and that's what they did on there. Merari took care of the courtyard wall. Remember the outside part of the sanctuary? And all the frames and posts to make sure that worked. So that was definitely enough to work on, but they had other duties as well. We'll find that out as we continue on here. Here's an example, the image here of them carrying the ark in front of Israel. And remember, they took him right through the river. The river stopped up, and then everyone passed around them, and then they went on. They were part of this whole part, and this is the Levites doing their part on there. They transported the temple, the items, and the whole idea of keeping something sacred, even for them, above what they were. they still took care of it and maintained it. There were a lot of duties and jobs of the Levites. As I went through this, I started going into a whole bunch of different parts of the Bible, of the Old Testament, trying to understand what they did. When it came time to have a permanent temple, they took care of the courtyard. They counted everything, made sure it was there. They made sure that the flour and spices were there when the people needed them for doing the different parts. They cared for the rooms, so they were janitors. They were accountants. They did all sorts of different things in the church. They had other duties. Some of them would teach, and they would teach the law to the people. They would read the word in the law, and they would do, of course, you might have read, hopefully you did. They would read the law on one mountain and echo the law on the other side around the people there, so they would make it a big, huge event. They would record the law, and they would also guard the temple, protect it, make sure people coming in were appropriately sanctified and doing that stuff. So they had a lot to do on there. Later on, they became supervisors, officials, judges, gatekeepers. When it was the time for making the showbread, these guys were the ones that did that. Then came their other duties, the ones I liked the best: praising God, prayer and thanksgiving. Okay, being a singer or a musician. But they weren't always in the temple. They had other duties too, and they would go out, and in this theocracy where God was their king, they were the ones who could say, hey, don't forget this law. You need to make sure you're following it. And they would be the ones to go out and administer that. And they would warn people. They would be the ones to say, haha, sorry, brother, you're messing up here. And they'd work on them and work to fix them, to draw them back in. They didn't always stay at the temple. They were given a certain amount of time they were at the temple. They were given their own towns throughout the different tribes, and they were also given the cities of refuge. They had to maintain those. Remember when somebody accidentally killed someone or accidentally injured someone, and the people, instead of, getting punished immediately, whether, by someone who was being another avenging angel and getting retribution for this death or this injury, you could run to the city of refuge and stay there, and then you could, survive. They would judge you and determine if you were appropriately, not guilty, and then they would let you stay there. There's a whole lot about the city of refuge. I won't go into the whole ideas on there, but you couldn't leave it, because if you did, those people could get vengeance from you. So you had to stay in that for a while until the next priest came in. There was a whole lot of order. I was reading through King David's time, reading about Nehemiah, and reading through the different parts on there. It said that the Levites, they would make sure to divide the duties. They would make sure to organize things and give people their rotations through the different tasks and all that. It was an impartial rotation. They were given, they had ranks and leaders within this. It wasn't just a free-for-all among that. There was an entire hierarchy of who was doing what and where it came from. It was an organized system for doing the job and organized for taking care of their families. They were supported by tithes and offerings. And it was considered for them as income, and so they were tithed also. That tithe went back in to the temple. It's kind of interesting that structure is similar to the structure of our church today. All of those different pieces happening at once, all the tithe coming in. We have our teachers and our pastors getting income, and they treat that as their income and tithe in. It's very similar to how we are structured. But it didn't stay nice. It didn't, we're human. We had some people who got jealous. We had some people who chose to, want to exert their power over things. We had Korah, Dathan, and Abihu. They started an insurrection. They started talking around. They started telling people, hey, how come it has to be Aaron and his sons? How come it just has to be this? Isn't Israel supposed to be all priests, all separated with God? So we should be able to do this. And so they finally got enough people to where they felt they could confront Noah. Moses. I really am not the researcher. I totally get mixed up. They confronted Moses to try and get their part in there. And on Numbers 16, 8 through 10, you can see this. I'm just going to read it here. Listen, you Levites, isn't it enough for you the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the Israelite community and brought you near himself to do the work of the Lord's tabernacle and to stand before the community and minister them? He's brought you and all your fellow Levites near to himself, and now you're trying to get the priesthood. You're doing the work of the church. You're doing the work of the sanctuary. You are part of this whole process, and you are given a special spot. Why are you trying to get up to this other level? And so, the news of the day, the headlines could have read, "Drop in the ranks, fired, grumblers plagued," because these three things happened in a very short order. Korah and his friends were told to bring censers out and said, okay, you want to be priests, you pretend to be priests, get your censers out and your incense and come out here. There are 250 of them. And before they, as they were trying to do this, they got this out there, they came together in front of them, and Moses said, look, if you're right, God's going to say you're right, you're going to live a normal life. But if not, let's make this totally clear. If this isn't God's will, he's going to do something totally different on you. That whole earth is going to take you away. Everyone step back. Korah, Dathan, and Abihu stayed there. This family stayed there. And they were right there at their tents. And the entire earth swallowed them up. Tents, family, and all the insurrectionists. Boom. And the rest of the 250, they were fired, literally, burned up. And as a reminder, all those melted incense containers, they took them and hammered them onto the Ark of the Covenant. Say, look, you see this? This is what happens when you start trying to go against what God wants. Well, there were a lot of people that weren't real happy with that. Said, great, now we're all going to die. It's busted them up just for complaining, right? Oh, well, great, fine, we're in trouble too. So they kept grumbling and complaining too. And God said, step back, let me do something to these guys. They really need to get a lesson here. And Moses ran over to Aaron and said, get your incense and get out there and pray for God to stop them. And they were all praying for it to stop. And Aaron got out in the middle where everyone was getting the plague and dying from it. So the grumblers were plagued. And he did stand between life and death. And the plague stopped because of him standing out there. And it was about 14,000 of them, 14,700 of them that died from the plague because they too grumbled. I think that maybe the point here was God said, I've set this up. Don't go against me. Pretty obvious, maybe. But just to be sure, they had a staff meeting. He said, okay, you really want another clue? Let's give you another clue. Let's get the staff meeting. I love that pun. They get the staffs and said, okay, bring them here. Bring all the staffs, set them before the Lord. Come back in a day. And I hope you remember, Aaron's staff had budded, flowered, and produced almonds. And no one else has done anything to them. It could have just had some leaves on it, and that should have been good too, right? But he took it steps further, just so people could know, this is obviously my choice. Well, despite that, the Levites kept doing different things throughout the Bible and being part of many of the stories through Deuteronomy and Samuel, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra and Nehemiah. You will find that they were just like everyone else. They would fall away and come back. A new king would bring them and say, wait, get back here. Hey, everybody, pay your tithes so these guys can do their work. That happened over and over again. And just like some of the people who would sin, the other people would sin, but they would come back and they would consecrate themselves over and over again to do that. And they would forget the different rules that happened. It took another person in David's time to make everybody remember how serious God took his temple and his ark and his covenant and his worship. When King David finally found the ark again, it finally was being brought back after being taken off. Uzzah was helping to move the ark along, and the ark tilted. The cart tilted. Oh no, I have to save it. And for some reason, he didn't pay attention to the rule again, and he just touched it. Zap, he was gone. Even then, all the way through, those laws were still something that needed to be followed, that needed to be guided. And the Levites were the ones who were supposed to know that and be able to do that. And that was a wake-up call again, because right after that, guess what? The Levites consecrated themselves again, and then were able to bring the ark back to the temple. King Hezekiah had a revival time. We, this year, are looking for a revival time. We are trying to come together and pray and worship and try to get the Holy Spirit to come with us again this year. This is a special focus for our church. And King Hezekiah said, wait, we've got to do this. We've got to get back to God. And the Levites, hey, get up here, consecrate yourselves, and get going. They loved it so much, they did a double Passover. Everybody came in. It was such a great service that it kept going. The Levites had consecrated themselves, but the other people had forgotten how. So the Levites had to step up and do extra service to offer the sin offerings for the people around and step in and do the different parts that even some of the priests hadn't consecrated themselves for. And again, Hezekiah said, give the offering so these guys can focus on doing God's work. And there's a lesson we should learn there. Our offering and our tithes is important for making sure that those who are in service in the different levels around us and above us, that we can provide for them and help them focus on God even more. The Levites didn't always have that part. They weren't always in there. When they were serving in different ways, they would get that offering, and then they would go to their farms and go to their things and do that work too. A little bit like how the lay people here, we do our work, we participate, but then we have our lives and other stuff we're focusing on. It's just another parallel. Well, there's a whole lot of parallels. In our time, the Levites could possibly be the people who are singers, musicians, accountants, janitors, groundkeepers, deacons, treasurers, kitchen staff, deaconesses, Sabbath school teachers, greeters, lay pastors, elders, secretaries. All of these people are working for God in his temples, in his church, trying to do that. And I believe strongly that when God says you are an order of priesthood in our time now, that he means that some of us are Levites. I can do some things up front, but the work of a pastor is a whole lot more than that. A layperson can do pieces of different things all over, but some other people have different jobs that take up way more of their time, and if you can have different people dedicate their time to God doing that, they need to be able to do that too. Here is where it draws in. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And then skipping down to verse 9, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Again, chapter 4, Peter says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks, as one who speaks oracles of God. Whoever serves, as one who serves by the strength that God supplies. It's interesting that there are two parts to that, like the two parts to the priesthood. In order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. And here's where we come back to the verse for today. As you get the chance to be part of his church, you may be called, I hope you feel called, to serve in certain ways, because we all, I believe, should be working in the capacity of a Levite, helping, building, growing together, going out and doing our parts with him. Here's our instruction. Do not be negligent. God has chosen you to serve and stand before him. Let's pray. Dear God, it is an honor to be part of this great church that you love and want the best for, that you have given tasks and duties to be part of the work of salvation, to be part of the worship and praise. Please guide us into a closer relationship with you, and guide us into a closer working relationship with each other inside the church. Help us find ways to be part and join together. Thank you so much for your great blessings and your love. Amen.